maybe if I can give a little bit of advice, I would have said to look at the obvious things more critically. The person that was the answer to my equation was sitting right next to me almost every single day, which was one of our coaches that I had on staff. I was paying this coach a rate I couldn't afford.
Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of What's Next. And I think very appropriately as we start this new year, and most of us are thinking about making some pivot in life, whether it's a New Year's resolution to change something, or maybe a resolution to amplify and pivot forward into something that was working really well for you last year. I've got my good friend, Brian Doyle, on with us, as you'll remember from episode 10, talked about leveraging his athletic ability and sort of prowess on the rugby field to bring that into sport, having the successes that come with that. And as of late, has really made this incredible pivot in his business. And as we were talking the other day, thought, what a great real world opportunity to discuss what's happening in his life and his business as it leads into kind of what we're thinking about for our businesses going forward. So without any further ado, BD, welcome back, man. So good to have you.
Thanks, Brian. Happy New Year.
Yeah, same to you, man. Same to you. So I don't want to do too much of a recap of episode 10. Folks, you can go back and find it there. But you and I talked about using your athletic ability. I mean, you are a monster of a dude, a huge empowering force, probably on the rugby pitch. And then I know you in the business world solely as a sort of gentle giant who's brought those tools forward. So before we talk about pivot, maybe your top one or two things that you'd say, yeah, I took this from a competitive sports environment and was able to leverage that into the business of Axios Core today.
Yep, sure. So I rugby's a hard sport, difficult one on the body. I'm a big, tall, lanky guy, and I had a lot of injuries throughout my career. So I really had to address those when I was playing. My answer was a focus on core strength and mobility and balance. And I really took that to heart in my training. And then I basically envisioned a device that I brought to market, kind of started out as a hardware business. And then I sort of pivoted that, I guess is a fair thing to say now that we're on this podcast here. But I changed it a little bit. The hardware was so good and it embodied so many philosophies around training, progression. So adding difficulty or challenge in relationship to your stability, your core strength, your balance, and your mobility. And I launched a digital platform that really provided expertise and guidance. So for me, I felt strongly enough about the problem that I solved for myself as an athlete because I saw results from focusing my attention and time to this form of training. And I was so kind of obsessed with this. How do I get this result for anybody, regardless of kind of sport or athletic ability or prowess? How can I make this as repeatable as possible? And that's where I landed on this digital platform where I basically connect you with a personal coach who will assess the body and then customize a workout using our equipment, but also just your body in general to provide, the best outcome from a performance and really just psychological stickiness, something that you can easily come back to, have the motivation to continue with, right? So yeah, that's where the business kind of came from.
No, it's great. And I think the takeaway there, which we did touch on in that first episode, but maybe we'll go a little deeper here, which most of our audience can really, I think, attach to, which is I solved a problem for myself. I think a lot of us, that's where our sort of undying core belief, no pun intended, comes from, which is I saw this problem, I solved it for myself. There's got to be other people that are going through this. And as I was coming out of my cancer journey a couple of years ago and had gone from 220 pounds to 160, you were there with Axios Core, and I was just a customer of like, hey, how do we go on this journey? And it obviously helped solve that problem so much so that I'm now an investor, and you and I spend time together. But I think that's an important piece, that again, in the audience, if you've solved a problem or thinking about solving a problem that you are passionate about, like Brian is continuously, you're probably on the right path because your heart is going to be there. And so will be your work and your time and your commitment. And by the way, so will your people. And I know that from Brian's team that, man, they are committed to the mission. And so with that, I think that's a good kickoff as we go into, you were doing a lot of hand-to-hand combat. And I say that because you have Axios Core, you've got this awesome core build out, I'll say equipment, machine, system, got the app, but it was you as a company selling to guys like me individually. And as we know in the world of commerce, like that is a tough business when you're doing a lot of just end user sale. And you kind of came to the realization without kind of, spoiler alert here, going from hand-to-hand combat, one-to-one to one-to-many. And so maybe talk to me about how did that evolution happen? Like what was the thing that clicked in your brain of, oh crap, I think this is going to make sense, and maybe even get closer to what your superpower is, which is dealing with coaches, right?
Yeah. So it was definitely an evolution that you were very much a part of. And, I think that, like you said, the most important thing was that I just had this uncompromising belief in the end result for the customer, the client, right? That became the driving force behind the entire company. Our ethos was just give everybody this amazing result. And yeah, I mean, I was doing it because of this. The only way, maybe a little bit of naivety as a startup founder, like problem solution. I'm a person, sell to a person, right? Like that. I think that's, you watch Shark Tank, right? I mean, everybody's consumer brands because of a lack of a better idea. Like, but it's a good way to get in front of people, and you have to do that. So
Yep.
I think there was a certain amount of we probably stayed in it a little bit too long, but that's because I didn't know how else to do it, to be perfectly honest. And yeah, I mean, I was the content creator, I was the marketer, and I was the sales force, making it really challenging. So we have, I think, just for a little bit of context, we had this very strange product or service without a comparison or a good comparison. So, and what I mean by that is, we give you almost like light touch personal training, right? Where you're getting this expert coach that's an expert in a field or a specialization. We've selected golf. We work solely with golfers right now. So it's hyper personalized. And then our system makes it so that the coaches can see everything that our customers are doing. And then do this asynchronous personal training feedback, meaning that the user is able to do the workouts on their own time, and the coach is able to review it, roughly within 24 hours and give them that feedback, which creates this really nice, sticky ecosystem for both the coach and the client. Now, to price that, I priced it between about $1,200 and $1,500 for a year, depending on which way you went. So it's a lot of money over, kind of upfront. But in comparison to what, right? Compared to personal training, it's a bargain steal home run, right? Compared to a gym membership, it's kind of expensive, kind of in line. So I was on the phone, and to my credit, to my detriment, I've had close to 2,000 sales calls, and really about 1,500 sales calls, and we closed 500 customers. So
wow.
Yeah, I mean, we learned the customer very closely, but I was on a bit of a hamster wheel because I was, like I said, a content creation, marketing. So I set up a sales funnel, a conversion funnel, which taught me the power of that, right? Of each step of percentages, making sure that you saw a user journey from first touch point to retention into year 3, right? So I was intimately, and my team was intimately involved in every part of that, but it was a hamster wheel. We couldn't scale it because marketing is expensive. It's getting more expensive, right? Meta charges an arm and a leg, and I was certainly in that. So
let me interject here, because I think that's important. It's expensive, and to add context to that, I think most of our founders here are going to very much dial in on this. It's expensive both in time and money.
Yes.
Right. It'd be one thing if it's just, hey, I'm going to put money with Google and Meta, and we're going to expect to spend $20,000 so we can make 40. That's one sense of the expense. But you just kind of focused on that you are also having to be the content creator because, yeah, you're in startup mode, right? You don't have a team of 15 people who are out there creating content, editing content, getting it published. getting your thumbprint on it. You're doing both of those pieces of equation. And I think that's why our audience can say, hey, man, I'm there too. Like, I know exactly what this pain is. And then you insert the word scale. So I'm going to pause here. Every single one of us, every single one of you listening to this, but every single one of us in business have got to be consistently asking, how do I scale? Doesn't mean you have to do it today, but it does mean that if your business is going to grow, that's another word for scale. How am I going to scale? And I know firsthand in Brian's case, it was, well, I have to sell because I'm also the founder of the company. I'm probably the best one. We're not selling steak knives here. We're selling life-changing things for people's health. That's amazing. But I also have to create content. And given we're in startup mode, I don't have an unlimited budget to do everything. So, Brian, what I loved about you was your ability to kind of step back. And I think this was the catalyst point for the pivot is I just step back and say, if I can't do both, how do I change this equation? Right. So I think in your ability to step back and say, what I saw was rather than sell one-to-one, how do I make the same passionate sales pitch without having to create a ton of content for all this hand-to-hand combat? And I can speak into coaches. And then you kind of found like, oh, well, if I speak to a coach who is already teaching 10, 20, 50 students, this might be a better pathway for Axios Core. So I've kind of outlined that. Where in that process would you say, okay, yeah, that resonated with me, and actually I got a little closer to my superpower?
Well, yeah. So I was building a product. So what happened was there's a difference between building a product and building a business, right? So, and there's product scale and there's business scale. So my product was a little bit more complex than maybe I was conceiving at the time, right? In terms of birth and in terms of, so I kind of got bogged down, at least initially. I was raising capital. I was doing all these exciting things and I got capital. I was thinking about product, right? And then all of a sudden, you end up in this hamster wheel. Now, because I was concerned with the end result for the customer, we ended up changing the product a lot to get that result. And in doing so, I took on these coaches that I naturally sold the vision to. And I was thinking about this before. So that worked. The coaches knew it worked. The clients knew it worked. I knew it worked. We all knew it worked. We saw it work. We had the proof there. So the product was working, but the business wasn't working. And and I talked to you so much about this. And now I realize that like you could, I think it's like I was making this really great dinner and I was putting all these ingredients in a pot, but I had one ingredient off, right? Or I had a little bit too much of ingredient A or ingredient B, and that could ruin the dish, right? Like, and that's what happened is that there were fundamental problems in my business that I couldn't solve. And I was throwing my time and my effort and my energy to solve those fundamental problems that were unsolvable. And yeah, capital does solve problems. But I'm so happy I didn't get the capital I needed to solve these problems, because it would have been placing a Band-Aid or creating a worse business than what we sort of landed on. Right. So
let's pause there too, because I don't want to rip past all these awesome nuggets, which is, the money does not solve the problems, right? And oftentimes it masks it. So I think for the audience who are like, man, I am stuck. I wish I could go raise 50, 100, a million, whatever their number is. And I'm stuck at only half that number, a third of that number. I'm not being Pollyanna about this when I say, maybe look at this as an opportunity to step back, tighten the belt a little bit, and rethink some of the stuff that maybe money really isn't solving. It's just kicking the can down the road. And Brian, I think you did a great job, very openly about, sure, I can go raise more money, but that's not the end result here. And it's not the end goal. You actually stepped back and said, there's a better way to do this. And we're not going to solve it with money right away. I think money is a challenge for all of us in every one of our businesses, for sure, as we're continuing to grow. But I love the fact that you took that approach, because that created this rethink in what you were doing. And I don't think a lot of entrepreneurs take that same approach, right? They look at it as, if I just could raise more money, this problem goes away. And you were smart enough to know it actually isn't going to make it go away. It's just going to make a bigger problem.
Well, and I want to be honest with all of your listeners, and because that is true. I did step back many different times and said, how can I solve this? But money was always the best solve that I can come up with, right?
Sure.
So money was the best solution I can come up with. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't have been able to solve the problems with the right amount of capital, because capital does solve certain problems. Because we had, right, on paper, like our cost of acquisition was good, right? Like was reasonable. We had a growth problem, right? So our retention was great, our conversion rate was great, but our growth rate was too low, right? So I made the argument that if we threw money at the marketing, the content creation, that we would have scaled at a reasonable rate. And I might have been right to a degree. However, taking on money is a heck of a responsibility that comes with a lot of risks, right? Like in terms of taking capital. Fortunately for me, it was a down market, so I wasn't able to raise that amount of capital to solve that growth problem. And I knew that. And then it kind of dawned on me because, you know, and I kind of got to the solution a couple of different times, but not fully. And it really came down to what is the unlock for this business. And I was so obsessed with the client, the end user, which is a good thing. It wasn't ever a bad thing because at the end of the day, your product has to work. But the coach was really the unlock. And when I realized that, and, you know, I got into a B2B kind of friendly sales scenario with a wonderful golf club, Santa Luz, that we're now launching our first pilot this month, 2 weeks now. But the general manager there was fantastic and was asking me thought-provoking questions about my business. And I approached him honestly and transparently about what we had and the impact that could is potential for his membership base there. Totally all true. And, you know, what I said to him was, I'm not sure what the revenue model is. So, you know, it was sort of this transparent founder. And I think that's the benefit of being in a startup, is that you do get to be a little bit more vulnerable at times, and people are much more interested. Some people don't want anything to do with it, right? In the real world, like, I don't got time for that, you know, buddy, right? Like, let me know when you got this figured out. But there are certain types of people that do like figuring this stuff out. So the where I'm going with this is that the unlock hit me like a ton of bricks. That really it was, I think, us taking a back seat, almost an ego thing, right? Like you think about your brand, and I think unbeknownst to me, maybe actively thinking about this, like I was taking all the revenue from my sale in my old model, and I was figuring out what to do with that revenue in order to create a good business. But what was my problem? Growth rate. In this model, I decided, well, I'm going to prioritize the coach. I'm going to make the coach the champion, the hero. I'm going to give the coach the lion's share of the revenue to incentivize the coach to build an amazing business that changes people's lives, and take a back seat to that, right? So I think ultimately it was us, the brand, Axios, the brand, realizing that we are an enabler for great people to do great things, both the coach and the client, right? And I need to be able to enable that relationship. And when me and this general manager at this club figured this out together, we were both kind of wowed with the outcome. So I was fortunate enough to get product market fit with my first conversation, so to speak, or at least some proof points in the model, which only strengthened from there, because when you know, it's when it's a home run, you just kind of pick it up and you run with it.
Well, here's the attaboy. So again, I'm frantically writing notes, right? It's what I do. For anybody in the audience where you feel a little bit stuck in your business, in your product, wherever it is, Brian said something that was critically important that I've found across many founders who are successful. I've seen plenty who aren't as well, is step back, check your ego at the door. You said, I was honest, I was transparent, and basically I came with this sort of open approach to, hey man, I haven't figured this out and I could use some help. There's a lot of humility in that. And you're right, some people are going to say, hey, not my problem, you go figure it out. Not the right fit anyway. But I think a lot of us want to fake it until we make it. And I've talked a lot about this on the podcast. The quicker you get rid of that imposter syndrome, stop faking it until you make it. In fact, I think I shared at the beginning of last year, my mantra was make it so you don't have to fake it. in order to make it, and we know this from sports, you got to learn, you got to grow, and you got to show up and say, I am coachable. Okay. So the minute you say, I am coachable, which means I don't know, I need help, please, it's an ask. Guess what happens? And Bryan is living proof of the light bulb went on. You had two people, one of whom's not vested in the company, this GM at the golf course saying, oh my gosh, this was going to be perfect for us. I'm so glad you asked me to help you in this because it's a win-win. So Bryan, I love the fact that number one on the show, you're talking about it because I tend to think we want to puff our chest out and be, a big S on the front talking about how amazing. I think just saying, look, I arrived with, I don't know, and I need some help here, created this transition and pivot, which is going to be monumental in the company. What a great takeaway. If nothing more we get out of this is show up with open hands and open arms about, hey, I need some help here. That'd be great. I mean, that's kind of what the show is all about. What's next is about how do we get to where we're going and leverage experience like Bryan is sharing here. So I appreciate you sharing that. I'm going to shift to the next step here. So you've come up with the aha, got Santa Luz, the GM there is on board. You guys are getting ready to launch. You now got to come back into your team and say, hey guys, we're going to make a little bit of a change here. And I know you're not fully, through it and baked, which is kind of cool. This is where we are in the journey. How have you thought about conveying that to employees, contractors, investors? What's kind of crossed your mind and how that journey goes for them? That number one, it makes sense. And number two, you're sort of empowering them through your motivation to say, hey, we now have a bigger hill to climb, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah. I just had a really wonderful conversation last night with she was really running a sort of this it was an operations function for us, but it was sort of a taskmaster. And I essentially, I brought her up to speed about on it, and she's been so reliable and so dependable and always in the background, and realizing there's a much bigger opportunity in this for her if we are collectively successful. So
I'm smiling because I know you're talking about, and she is amazing.
Yeah. So it was a really great opportunity to have that conversation and offer a promotion of sorts in terms of role while updating because I think you realize that first of all, it's exciting to talk about. I think that's one way to check if it's a good idea. Again, I was excited about starting this business, and then I got into this lull where it almost felt like, how am I going to get through these obstacles, right? Like, how am I going to get out of bed and get through these challenges? And now the excitement's back in terms of I can conquer the world, right? You need that feeling as a startup founder because otherwise, it's just not going to work. So I think the conversations need to have that energy, right? Like I've had hard conversations with investors that are not fun, that are just necessary. This is a fun conversation to have with investors that's energetic, and that energy is, contagious. So you need to have that. And that's a good, kind of litmus test. I think if you're talking about a pivot, good idea, bad idea, right? Like, how does the energy feel? Sometimes you have to make a pivot. This is sort of like, yeah, we had to make a pivot, and now this is an accelerating moment. So I think with the internal team, and also I think there's a certain amount of practicality to it. Is how is this going to benefit you, right? Like, because that's what I had to do. It's not how is this going to benefit the brand, right? How is this going to benefit Axios? Like, how does this benefit you on my team working for me in this vision together, right? Like, how does this benefit my coach? So again, I think a little bit of the brand taking a back seat, and how is it going to benefit, the people that are responsible for helping me get it there? Then sticking with that approach, if you will, because I think that's, if it makes sense, it makes sense, and it's got to make sense on a number of different levels.
No, it's good. And I'm drawing some analogies here. So I know, and this, regardless of sport, we have preseason, most likely 2 or 3 a days. And as you get to the end of that, you are worn down. You're just like, man, we got a whole season in front of us, but this period, I'm just worn down and I need some excitement. And any good coach will say, we have 3 more days of 2 a days. and then we're a week away from our first game, and here's the schedule, and start talking about that. And you go, oh man, this breath of life has just come into us as a team. And I think you're likening that in the business world where, yeah, if it isn't exciting, then we already know the pivot doesn't make sense. So that's easy checkbox number one. The second you mentioned was I looked from our investors in through our partners, including the coaches, down through my employees, not in that order. And I asked, is it good for those people? And if the answer was no, no, yes, we're in the wrong thing. And then the final piece is, and you and I talked offline about this, a pivot, to be really clear by definition, is not a change of direction in the opposite way, right? That is literally going in the other direction. That's not a pivot. A pivot is, and a good way to measure it is it an amplification or a change from where we've been? And in most cases, the employees are going to say, good. It isn't like we're doing Axios Core and tomorrow we're going to start talking about doing stretch bands.
Right.
And you go, well, that's not a pivot. That's an about face, right? That's a total change. Your pivot was same business, same customers, same core product, but we're shifting who the end audience is to make them the champion here. And that's the coach. So I think those are really good check valves, regardless of whether we're talking about Axios Core or any other business for our audience. It's that, can I check it against those three things? My investors, or, on the money side, our customer base for sure, and then our employees. I think that's a really good place to go. So you're in and through that. Have you given any thought? This has kind of popped into my head. Have you given any thought, or is it too early to say, okay, we've identified the pivot, but how do we measure this going forward? How do we know if we're actually on the right new track? Are there any thoughts that have come to mind?
Like KPI type.
Well, is it KPIs? Is it a resonance in the marketplace? Yeah. What might, one of them you mentioned is, in talking to Jenna, your superstar, right? And plenty on the team, when sharing with them, you're getting back already, I know this re-energized excitement of, oh, this would be awesome. Okay. I think that's a good measuring post for, are we on the right track, right? There's one about, hey, I'm just excited. But when you get that affirmation from your staff saying, great idea, let's go, that's a good checkbox. What else maybe, I'd say outside of specific KPIs that you guys are using, what would you be looking at in the future saying, that's probably a pretty good indication we're on the right path?
Yeah. So for me, the most important data point to see is growth rate, right? And it's going to be user based, but measured through what? And I think the answer is, it's formulaic. So how many coaches, how many clubs for us equals how many users, because then it becomes a really simple compounding math problem, right? How many clubs and coaches do you have? So for me, it's growth rate was the only thing ever stopping us from becoming, the brand that we all want to be. I don't think that changes. We're just now measuring.
And to be specific, so growth rate for you was total number of coach. Like, let's explain that, right? So if someone's listening, they go, I don't really even understand what your business is, and I think I know what growth rate is in my company, but maybe add some context to, what does growth rate actually mean?
Yeah, well, so growth rate is the rate at which you're growing month over month, right? So if your business got 20% bigger from month 1 to month 2, right, that is your growth rate. Growing at 20% is phenomenal. 30% is better, right? And for us,
but is it better? Let's say you were spending 50% more money to get a 30% higher, because this is where I don't want to get stuck in this, but having lived through it with Galway Bay, we doubled revenue in 2024. We also came to find out that we were barely above the Mendoza line on what the market wants to talk about as ROAS, right? We were spending, our marketing budget tripled literally, but we only doubled in revenue. And we had to step back and say, our growth rate was awesome. Our profitability sucked.
Yeah.
It sucked.
It's a great point. And I think consumer brands are almost always bogged down by this because of ROAS, or the almighty ad dollar. So for us, and maybe this is a bit of a myopic view, kind of with what I already know, but we've been basically selling organically even when we were going direct consumer, so we didn't have to deal with ad spend, and really it was just figuring out how to grow organically. And the idea was, if we layer an ad spend, then it'll be profitable growth. for us in this model, we're actually removing almost all of our costs associated with delivering our service, which includes ad spend.
Right.
So in this model, growth rate, any growth that it comes without any cost. So I guess I'm assuming that any growth is good growth in this model, assuming that we don't find this massive cost we need to go deal with in order to continue doing the model. Not a great answer maybe to some of your listeners out there. But
no, I think it's actually perfect, right? Because the benefit for you and I is we get to do this off camera way more than we do it on camera, right? I mean, this is our relationship. So what I love is as you're focused on growth rate, as I'm working with you, it would be, all right, let's add some context to that. And everybody listening is like, I'm hearing this. This is great, right? We can say growth rate. And if we just say number of users, number of subscribers, number of products sold, if we pick one thing, but we aren't asking the underlying question is, and I look at it as margin and profitability. And I know that's what you're driving at. You are so focused in on it that sometimes stepping back to say, you're right. I intuitively already think about growth rate with all of these other inputs.
Yeah.
But what comes out of my mouth is number of users. But you and I both know that when we really dig into it is, are we gaining those users at a more profitable rate? Because we're an early startup business, we can use all of that extra money to then not have to raise, not have to dilute your founder equity, and grow at a higher pace because we can pour it right back into the business. So I think this is an actually perfect live example of, folks, if you're looking to grow, number one, ask why. That's Brian's pivot. And then number two, what's the measuring post for growth? And does it point back to being more profitable with better margin? And if the answer is no, then your why, let's say we just want more subscribers because we're getting ready to sell the company and that's how we're valued. Awesome. If that's your game plan, put it in writing and measure yourself by that. My guess is if you're where Brian's company is, you're going to be saying, I actually need cash to grow. You mentioned that earlier, Brian, and I'd really rather not do it by raising capital and diluting my equity. So I love this. I think this is a perfect example of
and
going
EBITDA,
through that exercise.
EBITDA would be the financial term, right? We're prioritizing EBITDA, and we're doing that because we've abandoned a lot of old costs that were heavy, and we have a model that we expect is going to be a compounding growth rate, right? Because and that's the beauty of distributor models, is the more distributors you have, in theory, right? Everything else holding true, the more and products you get sold. So
yep.
Everything else being equal, right? You get into some other problems, I think, when you get at big scale, right? When you're talking about distributor models, but yes. And I think the other thing that I want to point out for your founders and other people thinking about startups is that I used to hear investors say this, like tech investors, and it would piss me off, to be perfectly honest, right? Like you should be, what are you prioritizing? And it's like growth rate. Well, think about a better way to grow. And it's obnoxious when you're in it because
yep.
you can't see that better way. So, and I think I went through a lot of pain. I hope, that most founders don't have to go through the amount of pain as I've gone through. So, when it hit me like a ton of bricks. But I would say that maybe if I can give a little bit of advice, looking back at my own personal journey, I would have said to look at the obvious things more critically. So for us, like the person that was the answer to my equation was sitting right next to me almost every single day, which was one of our coaches that I had on staff. I was paying this coach a rate I couldn't afford, right? To be quite perfectly honest. And it created this really big anchor for the business. And had I in that moment said, you know what if we just give you most of the revenue from this service, and then it would have solved itself. I wasn't mature enough or didn't understand it well enough, or maybe hadn't gone through enough pain to realize that then. But I guess if what you're hearing is making you kind of be like, oh yeah, well, obvious, like duh, like sounds good if you could figure out that distribution model. Well, I guess my advice is if you're stuck, and if you're not stuck, awesome, right? But if you're stuck and you have something that you believe is still working, like there's something that's still working. That was always the frustrating part for me, is that I knew it worked, but I was still stuck. And investors don't really care. Like a lot of investors just be like, well, like, oh, that sucks, right? I'm not going to give you any more money. Then that's the time where you kind of really critically think, and it might feel crazy, because it would have felt crazy to me, 2 years ago, to say that this is the answer, because I would come up with some sort of internal objection at the time. But had I really taken it through full paces, I would have landed on, oh, wow, this actually is not that difficult. And it costs nothing. And again, if I heard myself saying this to myself 2 years ago, I probably would have rolled my eyes. But, there it is, right? So.
Yeah. And to bring it back where we started the show, and I'm going to continue on this, but really to bring it back where we started the show, which is even in our personal lives, think about 2022 at the end of that year, December 31st. I'm sure if you were talking to yourself then, now as the father of a 2-year-old, right? Like life has dramatically changed. You would have told yourself a bunch of things and you'd say, duh, that seems so stupid. But 2 years ago, you just didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I think the point here is, as we look forward, let's try to see around as many corners as we can, listen to guys like Brian who are giving us, because that was kind of my ender, which was, what would you tell yourself? And you've given a good insight, which is I'd lean more into, I'm going to put words in your mouth here, but seeking input and advice, right? And you did that kind of on a whim to talk to the GM at Santa Luz, and some really great things came out of that. I know you've done that with me. And my advice here to other founders is when talking to your investors in the beginning stages, it may be just as important, if not more, to say, outside of an investment, can I count on you to be someone I can ask questions to and lean into? Right. And Brian, you did a really good job with that. We spent a lot of time before I put $1 in we went through this a lot. And I really enjoyed our time because of your quality of questions and your humble approach to, I don't know everything. So I think advice for other founders is, as you think about raising capital in the future or building an advisory board, surround yourself with people who you can ask these questions to, who you can surround yourself with, that are going to pour into you, not just because you have a passion and a driving ability, but that you've got the right product and you need some information, right? Which has been, I think, really cool on your journey.
Yeah. And the one other thing I'll say here is that you and I talked about this 9 months ago. So the other thing that I think is difficult about what, at least my personal journey, or at least landing on the right solution, is that, there's so many elements that are right and you get one element wrong, right? Like I didn't fully understand, because we talked about, oh, let's go through coaches. And then I basically said coaches and make it more general. Like I went outside of the golf realm. I mean, we talked about, what was the gym? I'm drawing a blank now, but we were talking about going to a gym with this model of this coaching model. But that got me away from my specialization of golf. Right. And then we talked about going to a distributor. You and I talked about a lot about this one main distributor in the golf space with the coaches. But there was like a barrier there. Right. And then and so like we almost had it a couple of times. And then it still took me another 6 months before I realized that it was a lot, I guess, simpler, so to speak, than and kind of organic if I would have allowed it to be. But there was also an element of luck here. And, you get the old adage of like, who's lucky? Is it the person that just tries a lot and, eventually gets lucky or whatever? But still, yes, the right conversation at the right time to kind of give me the right affirmation, right, with that potential pilot partnership. So it's not easy to kind of land on this, these big pivots, I would say. So yeah, if you're stuck and you're struggling and you spend a month trying to unearth that next direction and it doesn't come, personally, I would say that's okay. Like have more honest conversations with different people that are somewhat in the space. And that's probably the best advice I would have given myself, you know, just to lessen the pain a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head, and I'm going to leverage the two words, right? Luck and simplicity, because look, Tim Ferriss is pretty famous for saying the people who are lucky are the ones who just create their own luck by being out there more than the others. And so you having these conversations, I'm sure you had more than 10 or 20 that went nowhere.
Yeah.
But you were creating the opportunity to finally land on something that would be lucky. But the reality is you were doing the hard work, which is painful. And my hope is I hope everybody gets to experience that side of pain, which is work through it, the two-a-days to get to the season, right? To use our sports analogies here. And ultimately, as I've seen in my life, and Brian, I think this show is kind of attested to where you're at, and it's a continuous journey. There'll be probably another pivot that happens is, does it make your business, does it make your product, does it make your process, does it help your people do things simpler, right? Because in that, then your pivot should be more of an aha. When the pivot is, we've added complexity, we've added more work, we've added more money, we've added 50 new features. There are Harvard studies in volumes that will show you there are crash and burns around every one of those corners. Where you've seen companies go from somewhat complex, moving towards simple, and that's their pivot, I think you'll see a lot of success stories. And Brian's certainly speaking about one of them. Stripped out some of the things that were complex, marketing, hand-to-hand combat, tons of content being created for each individual user, to really honing in on, I have one specific, we call it our ICR, ideal customer relationship, call it your avatar. We know what our coach looks like. And those coaches are energetic about their students. They want to make more money. They want to get more time back in their own lives. They want to have a bigger impact. Okay, well, that kind of simplifies the sales process. It simplifies our message. It actually actuates the thing that the device was built to do, was to put flexibility and vibrancy back into somebody's life. Okay, all boxes just got checked. So not to, pun intended, oversimplify, but Brian, you're just right. That pivot came with simplification, and therefore you started to create your own luck, which I think the takeaway more than anything is, if you're stuck, and you were saying this, get yourself out there, ask other people questions. The more you ask, the more luck you're going to have. And my guess is those people will say, but what if you just did half of the things you said you were doing? Would it be easier? Keep your ear to the track on that, right? I think that's an important thing.
And another little practical tidbit for speaking with investors, they love humility and openness to change, because those are the moments they actually like participating in. So, you ask for money, you're going to get advice. You ask for advice, you might end up actually getting money. So that is true. And even if it's just like a really good conversation, introductions, like those are energizing. So it's a great opportunity when you're not sure to go and talk to people about, the more fully baked of a pitch you go to somebody with, the higher chance of them saying no. The more open-ended you go to somebody with a question, right? A hard problem to solve. People love, especially investors, every investor thinks they're the one of the smarter people in the room, right? So bring them a hard problem to solve collaboratively. And then, that's a great way to have more conversations that are meaningful.
Well, I think that's a great ending point, which is, again, arrive with your humility, be open to change. That's where pivots happen, by the way, whether you're starting afresh 2025 or you're thinking about it in your business. I'd say if these kind of questions, comments help you, reach out to us, right? Shoot a note in the comments below. You can reach us at the website. I've worked with Brian for quite a while. I know, as busy as he is, he still pours into people younger and older who maybe somewhere on the journey continuum that he's been on. I know that through our time here in San Diego. But just reach out, right? We're happy to help you, point you to some resources, help answer some questions, whatever it might be. We want everybody to succeed here. We want everybody to help find their what's next. Brian, thanks on short notice for digging in. We love the fact that it's authentic, right? We talk a lot about, we want experience, not opinion. you're going through it right now. And 6 months ago, we would not have been able to have this conversation.
So,
we can have it today because it's actually happening in your business. Folks, I encourage you to follow Axios Core. If you love fitness at any level, check out the product. Yes, shameless plug for sure. It changed my life on my comeback and my cancer journey. I know it will do yours, especially if you love golf the way that I do or surfing. So give it a try. BD, thanks for being on the show, man. I just appreciate it. I know our audience is, so thank you for being with us.
I love it. I love being here. It's a great opportunity to talk, Brian. So anytime.
Oh, that's great. Well, that's the pod. Thanks, everybody. Again, if you find it interesting or invigorating, like, subscribe. That's how we build the channel. That's how we get more like guys like Brian on the show. And more than anything, until we see you again, let's work together on finding what's next.